3 days before I walked across that stage to receive my medical degree, my mother called to tell me they wouldn't be there. Not we're running late. Not we might miss the opening. She called to tell me they had decided, like it was a calendar conflict they'd weighed carefully, that they would be attending my sister's gallery opening instead. You know how hard she's worked on this, sweetheart, my mother said. I remember standing in the hospital parking lot in my scrubs, still smelling like antiseptic, holding my phone so tight my knuckles went white. And honestly, graduation is just a formality at this point. You already have the degree. Just a formality. 8 years. 8 years of prerequisites and MCAT prep and rejection letters and a second application cycle and student loans that made me physically nauseous to think about. 4 years of medical school where I ran on 4 hours of sleep and cold coffee and the specific kind of stubbornness that only grows in people who have no safety net. 3 years of residency where I missed birthdays, missed holidays, missed everything and told myself it was okay because someday there would be a day we're celebrating. That day was in 3 days. And my mother was telling me my sister's watercolor exhibit was more important. I should explain something about my sister. Her name is Brooke, and she is 3 years older than me, and she has been the favorite for as long as I can remember. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I'd done enough therapy to say it plainly, the way you'd state a fact about the weather. Brooke is charming and artistic and loud in a way that fills a room, and my parents have always orbited her like she's the sun. I was the quiet one. The one who got good grades and didn't need much, and therefore, in their logic, didn't need much. When I got into medical school, my father shook my hand, literally shook my hand like I was a colleague he'd just met at a networking event. When Brooke got a small piece accepted into a local group show 2 months later, they threw her a dinner party. I told myself it didn't matter. I was going to be a doctor. I had bigger things to focus on. I kept telling myself that for 8 years. The morning of graduation, I woke up at 5 a.m. because I couldn't sleep. My apartment was quiet. I made coffee and sat by the window and tried not to think about the fact that the only people who'd bought tickets to my ceremony were my attending physician, Dr. Craston, Aldridge, and his wife, because he'd found out my family wasn't coming, and it simply said, "Then we're coming." In the matter-of-fact way he said everything. My boyfriend Noah had taken the day off work months ago. He'd bought flowers. He'd made a reservation at the restaurant I'd been wanting to try since I was an intern, the kind of place you plan a special occasion around. He was in the kitchen making eggs when I came out of the bedroom in my gown, and he stopped and just looked at me for a second. "You look like a doctor," he said. I laughed, which I hadn't expected to do that morning. His mother, who I'd only met 4 times because Noah and I had only been together for a year and a half, had driven 3 hours from Columbus to be there. She showed up at our apartment at 8 a.m. with a card and a small bouquet of white peonies, and when she hugged me, she said, "I am so proud of you, and I know that's not my place to say yet, but I mean it." I held it together until she said that. Then I had to excuse myself to the bathroom for a few minutes. Noah's mother, whose name is Patricia, no, wait, I need to use different names for this. His mother's name was something warm. Something that fit her. I'll call her as she introduced herself to me that morning, which was simply, "I'm his mom. And today I'm your mom too, if that's okay." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. Here's what I want you to understand about that morning. The thing I haven't been able to say to most people, I wasn't just sad that my parents weren't there. I was grieving something I'd been pretending wasn't dead for a long time. The fantasy of a family that would someday show up. The version of my parents I'd been carrying around in my chest, like a photograph. The ones who would eventually come around, who would eventually see me, who just needed a little more time. Standing there in my graduation gown while Noah's mother pinned a small corsage to my lapel that she'd thought to bring because she'd remembered I mentioned once that I thought corsages were underrated. I understood that my parents were never going to be that photograph. And it hurt in a way that was different from the ordinary hurt I was used to. It was the ache of something finally ending. The ceremony was at an outdoor amphitheater on the university campus. It was a perfect June morning, the kind that feels almost theatrical in its beauty, like the weather is in on the occasion. Noah sat between his mother and Dr. Aldridge and his wife in the 4th row. I could see them from the stage. When they called my name, Noah stood up before anyone else. His mother grabbed his arm and stood with him. Dr. Aldridge and his wife stood too. 4 people in a sea of hundreds, and they were all standing for me, and I had to keep my face very still as I walked across that stage and shook the dean's hand and accepted the diploma that represented the entirety of my adult life. I found out later from a cousin who'd seen the posts that my parents had gone to Brooke's gallery opening and that my father had given a little speech about her talent, about how proud they were. My mother had cried happy tears. It had been, by all accounts, a wonderful evening. I learned this 3 days after graduation, sitting on my couch with Noah, and I noticed that it hurt less than I expected. Not because it didn't matter, but because I think a part of me had finally stopped waiting. The months after graduation moved fast. I started my fellowship. Noah and I got engaged in October. He proposed at the restaurant we'd gone to after graduation, the one he'd made the reservation for, because he said he wanted to close the loop on that day properly. His mother cried on the phone when we called her. My parents were pleased about the engagement in a distant sort of way. My mother asked about the ring immediately. My father asked what Noah did for work. No one asked how I felt. No one asked about the fellowship. Brooke sent a text that said congrats, with 3 exclamation points and a champagne emoji, and then, 2 days later, asked if I would be willing to commission a portrait from her as a wedding gift, which she would sell to me at family discount. I said I'd think about it. I did not think about it. Here is where I need to tell you about what happened to Brooke's husband, because it matters to the rest of this story. His name is Donovan, and he was the kind of man my parents adored, on sight tall, confident, the type who name-dropped his business ventures the way other people talked about the weather. He had a small real estate investment company that he described as boutique and selective, and my parents thought he was extraordinary. My father golfed with him. My mother referred to him as Successful Donovan to distinguish him, apparently, from other Donovans she knew. What Donovan actually was, it turned out, was in significant legal trouble. I didn't know this until the following spring, when my father called me out of the blue on a Tuesday afternoon. My father does not call me on Tuesday afternoons. My father barely calls me at all. I was between patients when I saw his name on my phone and felt the specific kind of dread that comes from an unexpected contact from someone you've learned not to expect warmth from. "Your sister needs help," he said, without preamble. No hello. No how are you. No congratulations on the engagement, which had happened 6 months ago. Donovan's company had collapsed. There had been, my father explained haltingly, some mismanagement. Some investors were unhappy. The word lawsuit came up, and then the phrase personal liability, and then my father's voice went quiet in a way I'd never heard before. They had co-signed a loan for Donovan and Brooke 2 years ago, a large one, for a property that was now underwater. They were looking at losing their house. "We need to borrow some money," my father said, "just to get through this, until things stabilize." I sat in the small break room at the hospital and looked at the vending machine across from me and thought about the parking lot where I'd taken my mother's call 3 days before graduation. I thought about the corsage and Noah's mother and 4 people standing in the 4th row. "How much?" I asked. He told me. It was not a small number. I told him I needed time to think. He said they didn't have much time. I said I understood, and I would be in touch. Then I hung up and called Noah. Noah listened the way he always does, which is completely no interrupting, no jumping to solutions, just listening until I was done. Then he was quiet for a moment, and he said, "What do you want to do?" Not "what should we do?" Not "here's what I think." "What do you want to do?" I thought about it for 2 days. I talked to my therapist, who was worth every dollar of my copay. I talked to Noah's mother, who had become something I didn't have a word for, yet not quite a mother-in-law yet. Not just a family friend, something closer and more chosen than either of those things. She listened, and then she said, very gently, "You don't owe people a rescue just because you share blood with them." I called my father back on Thursday. I told him I couldn't give them the money, not because I didn't have it. I was honest about that. I had savings. The fellowship paid well, and I'd been careful with money my whole adult life because I'd had to be. I told him I couldn't give it to them because I wasn't sure it was the right thing. Not for them, not for me. I'd watched my sister and Donovan make choices for years that the rest of us could see from a distance, and I'd never said anything, and I wasn't going to fund a continuation of those choices. My father said some things that I'm not going to repeat here. My mother called an hour later and said different things that amounted to the same message. Brooke sent a long text that started with, "I can't believe you," and ended with something about how I'd always been jealous of her, which I'd heard enough times that it had lost its power to sting. I turned my phone off for the rest of that day. Noah made dinner. We watched a movie neither of us could remember the next morning. At some point, he put his arm around me, and I leaned into it and thought, This is the family I'm building. This is what I've been walking toward. My parents did lose the house. Not immediately. There was a period of negotiation and refinancing attempts, and a second call from my father that went worse than the first. But eventually, yes, they moved into a smaller rental across town. Donovan and Brooke separated 6 months later, which surprised no one who had been paying attention. I found out about the separation from my cousin. I heard about the move from the same cousin. My parents and I had not spoken since the Thursday phone call. The wedding was in April. It was nothing like what I'd imagined as a little girl, no cathedral, no enormous guest list, no performance of family harmony we didn't actually have. It was 60 people in a restored farmhouse outside the city, string lights and wildflowers and a string quartet that played during dinner. Noah's family came in from Columbus and filled a whole row. Dr. Aldridge and his wife were there. My colleagues from the fellowship were there. Friends I'd made over 8 years of training who understood what it meant to survive something hard and come out the other side still intact. Noah's mother, my mother-in-law, as of 4 o'clock that afternoon, had asked me weeks before the wedding if she could do something for me during the ceremony. She'd heard from Noah that my parents hadn't been invited. She hadn't asked why. She'd just said, "I want to be useful. Tell me how." I thought about it for a while, and then I asked her if she would walk with me. Not down the aisle. We weren't doing a traditional processional. But there was a moment in the ceremony, a specific moment we'd designed with our officiant, where someone who loved me would place my hand in Noah's. A small ritual about choosing and being chosen. She said yes before I finished asking. When that moment came, when she took my hand and held it for just a second before setting it in Noah's and looked at me with the specific expression of someone who was genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy for you, I didn't try to hold my face still this time. I let it do whatever it needed to do. There were 60 people in that farmhouse, and I looked at none of them. I looked at her, and then I looked at Noah, and I thought, I spent so long trying to earn love from people who decided before I was old enough to understand it that I wasn't worth the effort. And here I am. Here's what love actually looks like. It drives 3 hours on a Tuesday morning with peonies. It makes the reservation. It says I'm your mom today, if that's okay. I've been a physician for 2 years now. I work in a hospital about 40 minutes from the farmhouse, which Noah and I are renting while we save to buy something of our own. We have a dog named Otto who is extremely poorly behaved and who we love without reservation. My parents reached out last Christmas. My mother sent a card with a note inside that said they missed me and hoped we could talk sometime. It was the first contact in over a year. I read it twice, put it on the kitchen counter, and then Otto knocked it onto the floor and chewed one corner, which felt appropriate. I haven't responded yet. I'm not sure I will. I don't say that out of anger. I'm genuinely not angry anymore. That part took time and therapy and a lot of long conversations with Noah at the kitchen table after dinner. What I am is clear. I know who my family is now. I know what it feels like to be chosen, to be shown up for, to have someone drive 3 hours with flowers just because they wanted to be there. That's not something I'm willing to trade away for the comfort of pretending. My sister texted me last month just once, late on a Sunday night. It said, "I think I owe you an apology. I don't really know how to give it yet, but I'm trying to figure that out." I haven't responded to that either, but I saved it. Some part of me isn't ready to close that door completely. I am 31 years old. I am a doctor. I am married to a man who stood up before the entire room when they called my name. I have a mother-in-law who held my hand at exactly the right moment and didn't need me to explain why it mattered. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for the family they were born with to finally see them clearly. I decided to stop waiting, and somehow, in the stopping, I found the one I actually needed. I keep coming back to a small detail that shouldn't matter as much as it does: the peonies. Noah's mother drove 3 hours with a bouquet of white peonies because I'd mentioned once, in passing, that I thought they were underrated. She remembered. My own parents didn't remember the date. That's the thing about cause and effect that nobody tells you when you're young. It doesn't always look dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly in small choices, small rememberings, small showings. Up until one day, you look around and realize that the life you have was built entirely out of those choices, stacked one on top of another over years. My parents made their choices. They chose Brooks Gallery opening over my graduation. They chose to co-sign Donovan's loans without asking hard questions. They chose, for most of my life, to pour their attention and their hope into the child who needed the least tending, and to assume the other one would be fine, because she always was. What they didn't understand is that I was fine because I had learned to be fine without them. That's not the same thing as not needing them. I needed them. I just stopped being able to afford to wait. I think about what it actually took to get through medical school without a safety net. Not the studying I could control. I mean the specific kind of inner discipline required to keep going when you are genuinely alone in something. When no one is tracking your progress, or celebrating your milestones, or asking how you're holding up. That takes something that isn't just hard work. It's a decision you make, over and over, usually in unglamorous moments: a hospital break room, a parking lot, a bathroom where you've excused yourself to hold yourself together. You decide again that you are worth the effort, even when the people who were supposed to teach you that haven't shown up to confirm it. That's what nobody hands you. You build it yourself, or you don't have it. And then there's what Dr. Aldridge did, just saying them were coming, like it was obvious. That kind of decency is its own form of intelligence. He'd watched me work for 3 years. He understood what the moment meant. He didn't need it explained to him, and he didn't make it a favor. He just showed up. I've tried to carry that into my own practice, the understanding that seeing someone clearly and acting on what you see is one of the most useful things one person can do for another. What happened to my parents wasn't punishment. I want to be precise about that. Donovan's company failed because of choices Donovan made. The loan collapsed because of decisions made without enough judgment or caution. I didn't cause any of it, and I didn't wish for it. But I also can't pretend there's no connection between the values you build your life around and the outcomes you eventually face. My parents valued appearances. They valued Donovan's confidence over his character. They valued Brooks' visibility over my steadiness. Those priorities had real consequences, and the consequences arrived on their own schedule. I chose differently, not because I'm better, because I had to. I had to learn early that your integrity is the only thing that keeps you company at 2 in the morning when everything else has fallen away. That your judgment is worth protecting because you'll need it when it matters. That the ability to keep going through hard things is not something you're born with, but something you practice. One unglamorous decision at a time. Noah stood up before the whole room when they called my name. That's the family I built, and it was worth every single year of building it.